Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less. That's Marie Curie, and her words feel incredibly fitting for our topic today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take complex global issues, break them down, and really get to the core insights for you. And today we're tackling something critical, often hidden right beneath the waves. Silent poisons. The peril of sea-dumped chemical weapons. This isn't some dusty historical issue, it's incredibly current. I mean, just last month, August 2024, there was that shocking discovery in the Baltic Sea, something like 15,000 metric tons of old toxic agents.
A staggering amount. And it comes right alongside these really important discussions happening around abandoned chemical weapons, ACWs, and sea-dumped chemical weapons, the SCWs. They were key topics at the Chemical Weapons Convention Review Conferences, both in May 2023 and more recently at the 29th Conference of State Parties in November 2024. So, yeah, it's very much on the international agenda.
Right. So our mission today is to really unpack this. We'll look at the history, the threats which are very real right now, and what's being done globally about these dangers lurking in our oceans. We're basing our discussion on a critical piece from ORF, giving you a shortcut to getting informed on this vital global issue. And whether you're preparing for the UPSC mains, maybe brushing up for prelims, or honestly just curious about the world around you, this deep dive is designed to give you that crucial understanding. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. To really get a grip on this hidden danger, we need to go back. How did dumping chemical weapons in the sea even become a thing? Where did this massive problem originate?
Well, it's actually quite sobering. Ocean dumping was, for a long time, seen as a standard, almost traditional way to dispose of chemical weapons, particularly after World War I and World War II. It was considered convenient, maybe the cheapest option to get rid of stockpiles that were obsolete, damaged, or even captured from enemies.
Convenient. Yeah, I can see how they might have thought that back then, but wow. Which countries were mainly involved?
Oh, it was the major military powers of the time. We're talking about the United States, the former Soviet Union, the UK, Germany, among others. It wasn't just one or two nations. It was, unfortunately, quite widespread practice. The thinking was very much out of sight, out of mind. Get it off the land, sink it in the deep ocean, problem solved, or so they thought.
Out of sight, for sure, but definitely not out of mind now, is it? And clearly not out of harm's way. What exactly were they chucking overboard, and how did they manage such huge quantities?
Oh, exactly. And this wasn't just like harmless waste. They were dumping highly toxic chemical agents, things like mustard gas, Lewisite, really nasty stuff. These agents were often still inside munitions, like artillery shells or aerial bombs, or in various storage containers.
So active munitions, potentially?
In many cases, yes. And the methods, well, often pretty crude for bulk disposal. Sometimes they'd load everything onto old ships, take them out, and deliberately sink them scuttling, they called it. Other times, it seems they were just pushed directly overboard, straight into the water.
Just pushed off the side.
Apparently so, in some instances. And the scale we're talking about, it really shows this wasn't some rare event. It was standard operating procedure for a time, driven by convenience, not caution.
Okay, give us a sense of that scale. How much are we actually talking about?
Well, the numbers are pretty staggering, even based on the records we do have. U.S. military records, for instance, list at least 74 separate dumping operations just between 1918 and 1970. That's 32 off U.S. coasts and 42 near foreign shores.
74 operations. Just the U.S.
Right. And then you have Russian sources back in 1995 claiming they'd buried something like 160,000 tons at sea. The worldwide total of reported abandoned chemical weapons is estimated to be at least 1.6 million tons. But honestly, that's likely a minimum.
A minimum? Why only a minimum?
Because the record keeping from that era was often, well, incomplete, sometimes non-existent or classified and never released. So the true figure is almost certainly much, much higher. We're dealing with a vast, largely unknown quantities scattered across the ocean floor.
1.6 million tons minimum. That's just hard to comprehend. It really paints a picture. And you mentioned poor records. Are we essentially just finding bits and pieces by accident then? What makes it so hard to get a true picture?
That's a huge part of the challenge. We often lack precise coordinates for these dump sites. And there's another complicating factor that's often overlooked. While the really big stuff, like chemical weapons on those sunken ships, might have stayed relatively contained initially, a lot of the smaller munitions, shells, grenades, containers didn't.
How so?
Well, because of how they were dumped and, frankly, neglect by the disposal crews at the time, these smaller items were often just scattered. Then, over decades, ocean currents have dispersed them even further across the seabed. So instead of neat piles, you have this wide, unpredictable distribution. It makes finding them, assessing the risk, and planning any kind of cleanup incredibly difficult.
So it's not just isolated spots, it's potentially spread out, a dispersed hidden threat. That's a challenge. But these aren't just sitting there inertly, are they? Decades later, why are they still such a danger? What makes them so persistently perilous?
Right, they're far from inert. This brings us to what experts often call the triple threat from these sea-dumped chemical weapons, or SCWs. It explains why they remain so dangerous. First, and maybe the most immediate risk, is from the explosive materials within the munitions themselves. Many of these weren't just chemical containers. They were live bombs or shells.
Live ordnance. Still.
Yes, still capable of detonation. So there's a very real risk of unexpected underwater explosions, which can be incredibly powerful and destructive.
Okay, so explosion risk is number one. That's serious enough even without the chemicals. What's the second part of the threat?
The second threat is the risk of disturbance. These SCWs are just sitting there, often in relatively shallow waters, believe it or not. They can easily be disturbed by human activities. Think about bottom trawling by fishing boats, coastal construction projects, pipeline laying, even dredging for shipping channels.
So everyday activities could accidentally trigger something.
Precisely. Or even natural events like underwater earthquakes or strong storms churning up the seabed. Any disturbance can potentially set off these munitions. And that leads directly to injuries, or sadly, even fatalities for anyone nearby. We've seen tragic examples. You mentioned the Mediterranean earlier. Between 1946 and 1997, over 230 Italian fishermen were injured, and 5 actually died from encountering mustard gas munitions caught in their nets.
That's awful, just fishermen doing their jobs.
Exactly. And research efforts like the Hawaii Undersea Military Munitions Assessment, they've also highlighted these very direct, immediate dangers to people interacting with affected coastlines or waters.
A stark reminder of the human cost. Okay, so explosion risk, disturbance risk. What's the third part of this triple threat? It sounds like the slower, maybe more insidious one.
You're right, it is. The third threat is the long-term environmental damage from decaying containers. Over decades underwater, the metal casings of these shells and containers corrode. They rust, they weaken, they eventually breach.
And then the chemicals leak out.
Correct. When they fail, the toxic agents inside mustard gas, Lewisite, nerve agents perhaps leak directly into the surrounding seabed sediment and the water column. This obviously poisons the local marine ecosystem, harming biodiversity. But it doesn't stop there.
How so?
Through a process called bioaccumulation. Small marine organisms absorb these toxins. Then slightly larger creatures eat them, accumulating more toxins. It moves up the food chain. So fish and shellfish in these areas can become contaminated with dangerous levels of these chemical weapon agents or their breakdown products.
Which means it can get back to humans.
Exactly. Indirectly, but significantly, it impacts human health through contaminated seafood. We're seeing worrying signs of this, for instance, with rising toxicity levels being detected in fish and sediments in parts of the Baltic Sea, a known dumping ground. It's a creeping contamination of our food web.
Wow. Explosion risk, disturbance risk, and this slow poisoning of the environment and potentially our food. That is a truly grim triple threat. Given all this, what's the situation with international law and regulations? Have we caught up? Are there rules to deal with this mess?
That's a really critical question. And the picture is, well, it's mixed. On the one hand, there has been significant progress in international chemical disarmament generally. You have things like the 1975 London Convention, which specifically prohibits the dumping of hazardous wastes, including chemical weapons, into the ocean. That's been ratified by 87 countries, so it's a major step.
Okay, so dumping is banned now. That's good.
Yes. And then, even more significantly, you have the Chemical Weapons Convention, the CWC. It came into force in 1997 and aims to eliminate entire stockpiles of chemical weapons. It has been hugely successful in getting countries to declare and destroy their land-based stockpiles under international verification by the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
That sounds positive. A strong treaty, verification. So surely that covers these sea-dumped ones too. I sense a but coming.
You sense correctly. There's a very significant but, a major loophole, really. The CWC mandates the destruction of declared stockpiles, yes. However, it does not require retrospective action for chemical weapons that were abandoned or dumped at sea before 1985.
Before 1985, but isn't that when most of this dumping happened? After the World Wars?
Exactly. The vast majority of the known sea dumping, that estimated 1.6 million tons plus, happened well before 1985. So it effectively falls outside the CWC's core mandate for destruction and cleanup.
That's astonishing. So this enormous underwater arsenal is just exempt. Legal.
Largely, yes. It's a huge blind spot in the international legal framework. And adding to that, since the CWC entered into force, apparently no country has submitted any official notifications to the OPCW about past sea dumping operations. So there's a lack of transparency and formal accountability for these historic actions under the CWC itself. It's a key regulatory gap, or lacuna, as the experts call it.
Wow. So even though we know these SCWs directly impact things we care about globally, like the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 14 for life below water, even SDG 13 for climate action indirectly, there's no international law forcing anyone to actually clean them up.
That's the reality. There's no international legal mandate for their removal or destruction. There's growing awareness, yes,
Yeah.
and concern, but no binding obligation under current international law for these legacy weapons. It creates this strange paradox, really.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, our increasing ability to explore the deep sea, plus more industrial activity like offshore wind farms or pipelines, actually increases the risk of accidentally disturbing these sites.
Right. We might stumble upon them more often.
But on the other hand, those same technological advancements, better sonar, remotely operated vehicles, sophisticated mapping, also give us a much better ability than ever before to actually find, map, assess the risk, and potentially safely neutralize or remove these weapons.
So the tech is catching up, but the international will or legal framework hasn't quite mandated using it for this specific problem.
That's a good way to put it. The capability is growing, but the collective global commitment and funding required to tackle the pre-1985 legacy, that's still lagging.
Okay, that leads to the obvious question. Despite this regulatory gap, what is actually being done on the ground, so to speak, or under the water? And what more needs to happen to deal with this silent threat?
Right. It's not that nothing is happening. There are definitely important national, regional, and even some international efforts underway, even without that overarching mandate. For example, the U.S. passed its Ocean Dumping Act way back in 1972. And more recently, in 2006, the U.S. Congress required annual assessments of historical military dumping sites in their waters. So there's ongoing monitoring and assessment work there.
That's something. What about regions where dumping was particularly heavy, like the Baltic?
Yes, regionally, the Baltic is a key focus. The Baltic Marine Environment Protection Commission, which is known as ASHELCOM, has been doing really important work. They've initiated focused investigations in the Baltic and North Seas, trying to map out the extent of the problem and understand the risks better. And organizations like NATO are also involved. NATO actually engages with ASHELCOM, supports regional cooperation, especially in the Baltic. Crucially, NATO's Science for Peace and Security program, the SPS program, provides funding for research projects and initiatives. These are aimed at studying the risks, developing better detection methods, and improving disposal capabilities among member states. So it's fostering that practical collaboration.
Okay, so regional cooperation, some national efforts, research funding. Any specific countries leading the research charge?
Germany is definitely very active. Authorities like the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research are constantly conducting scientific studies. They're looking at things like how fast the munition casings are corroding, tracking any leakage of pollutants, understanding the ecological impact. That hardcore science is absolutely essential to figure out the best way forward.
It sounds like lots of pieces are moving, but perhaps not quite connecting into a global strategy yet. What's the missing link?
You put your finger on it. It often comes down to coordination and a shared global commitment. There was a powerful quote from Terence P. Long, who chairs the International Dialogues on Underwater Munitions. In a joint NGO statement, he said quite simply, "A global solution to underwater munitions threats requires global cooperation."
Makes perfect sense. One country can't solve this alone.
It's not a chance. What's needed is a truly holistic global strategy. And that has to include several key things. First, much better international collaboration on sharing historical data, opening up those old archives, combined with systematic mapping using modern tech, and continuous monitoring of known sites. We need a comprehensive global map of this problem.
Okay, knowing where it all is. What else?
Second, really leveraging technologies like advanced geospatial mapping and high-resolution sonar to properly assess these locations and conduct detailed risk analyses. Which sites are stable? Which pose an imminent threat? Third, this is critical, is collaboration on developing and sharing remediation technologies. We need safe, effective ways to remove or neutralize these weapons in situ. And a huge focus has to be on protecting the people, the divers, the technicians who have to actually handle this incredibly dangerous material. We need to prevent accidents and stop further bioaccumulation.
That sounds complex and expensive.
It is, which is why international cooperation on funding and expertise is vital. And finally, the big one. We really need to encourage states to revisit the Chemical Weapons Convention, to find a way to expand its scope or create a complementary mechanism that explicitly mandates accountability and promotes the responsible assessment and, where necessary, destruction of these older sea-dumped chemical weapons, including those dumped before 1985.
Basically, close that loophole we talked about.
Exactly. The CWC has been incredibly successful with declared land stockpiles. It proves international cooperation on chemical weapons can work. Now, that same spirit needs to be applied to this unresolved legacy polluting our oceans. It's essential if we're serious about safeguarding marine health and preventing future harm for generations to come. It feels like the next logical and morally necessary step.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener? Well, we've unpacked a really complex, often hidden issue today. We've gone from its origins and post-war convenience, looked at the very real dangers it still poses, and explored the ongoing efforts and the significant gaps that remain. It's a stark reminder of how past actions continue to impact our environment and health today. And for those of you preparing for UPSC exams, you can see how this topic weaves together history, international law, environmental science, security issues, and the challenges of global cooperation. It's a prime example of a complex current affairs issue.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. If you connect this to the bigger picture, these silent poisons really underscore how actions we might think are isolated or solutions we think are simple can have incredibly long-lasting, far-reaching consequences for the planet and for us. The real challenge now isn't just finding all these hidden munitions, though that's hard enough. It's about accepting our collective responsibility for this legacy and finding the political will to act decisively together for a healthier future ocean.
Well said. This deep dive hopefully has armed you with a much clearer understanding of this critical global challenge. If you found it valuable, please do hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and share this information. Spreading awareness really does help. And especially for our UPSC aspirants listening, if you have further questions on this topic or suggestions for other issues you'd like us to explore, please drop them in the comments below. We're here to help you stay informed and prepared. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time as we explore another vital story shaping our world.